21-year-old Ariel Valdez left her home in North Fort Myers, Florida, for a jog one evening in late August and never made it back. She was last seen running toward the Edison Bridge on surveillance footage that was captured around 15 minutes later at 6:45 p.m. At the time, Valdez was training for an upcoming marathon. It wasn't unusual for her to go on long runs, but her loved ones believed she was mentally unwell and in urgent need of help, prompting them to report her missing around 2 hours after she left the house. Valdez's mother told the police that her daughter had been behaving strangely over the last few days and that she had mentioned hearing demon voices in her head. Earlier that day, Valdez had fled her residence with no shoes on. She was found at a local electrical plant, and her mother had encouraged her to share her phone's location with the family due to concerns about her safety and well-being, but she had failed to do so, and law enforcement wasted no time launching a search for Valdez due to the concerning nature of the circumstances leading up to her disappearance. 5 days after Valdez vanished, her body was found in the Caloosahatchee River. While authorities have not revealed her cause of death, there were no signs of foul play, leading to the conclusion that the tragedy stemmed from the young woman's battle with mental illness. Number 11. Hector Ramon Martinez Ayala, while conducting a welfare check at a residence in Toole, Utah. In early August, police found the murdered body of 25-year-old Salt Lake County Sheriff's Deputy Marbella Martinez. She had been strangled to death at the home which she shared with her father, 54-year-old Hector Ramon Martinez Ayala, just months after joining the sheriff's office. Upon further investigation, detectives discovered that Martinez Ayala had withdrawn $1,000 from Marbella's bank account the day before her body was found. He had also sent his brother cryptic text messages about how he had made a big mistake and committed an unforgivable sin, and that he was leaving and never coming back. According to prosecutors, Martinez Ayala became increasingly obsessed and controlling toward his daughter leading up to her murder, acting more like a jealous lover than a concerned father. Marbella had reportedly confronted her father over some of her intimate belongings that she had found in his bedroom, and he had promised to stop his problematic behavior. But that didn't happen, according to investigators who claim that Martinez Ayala placed a tracking device on Marbella's car just days before her murder and followed the young woman to a hiking area where she spent time with someone she had just started dating. Marbella stayed at a hotel for a few days and was last seen entering her home on surveillance footage that was captured 2 hours before the mysterious text messages that Martinez Ayala sent to his brother. After sending the messages, the accused killer used his twin brother's ID to flee the United States. He's wanted on charges of murder, stalking, and obstructing justice. Number 10. Randall Morowski. Just days into the new year in 2024, 44-year-old New York resident Randall Morowski stabbed his wife, 38-year-old Ayala, to death outside their Lindenhurst, Long Island home. The couple's teenage son overheard his mother's screams for help from a nearby residence where he was visiting a friend and rushed home to find his father plunging a serrated knife into his mother's body in the family's backyard. Determined to save Ayala, the young man jumped on Randall, giving his mother a chance to escape. After taking just a few steps, Ayala collapsed in the street with a large trail of blood marking her final movements. Her son tried desperately to perform life-saving measures as he dialed 911, but Ayala succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. By the time police arrived at the scene, Randall had fled in his pickup truck. He was spotted by law enforcement shortly thereafter and led officers on a high-speed 7-mile pursuit before losing control of his vehicle and crashing into a building. Roughly 9 months after Ayala's death, Randall pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He's facing up to 22 years in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in October. Number 9. Joseph Couch. On what began as a typical Saturday in September, a gunman opened fire on passing motorists with an assault rifle along Interstate 75 near London, Kentucky. 5 people were shot, including one driver who was struck in the face, but all of the victims are expected to survive their injuries. The suspect, 32-year-old Joseph Couch, had legally purchased an AR-15 and 1,000 rounds of ammunition earlier that day. Prior to the shooting, he sent his ex-wife a text message stating that he planned to kill a lot of people. The woman alerted the authorities, but they were unable to prevent the onslaught of gunfire. Investigators recovered the gun, bullets, and Couch's SUV less than a day later, but Couch managed to elude law enforcement, sparking a manhunt that lasted for nearly 2 weeks, as police combed through 28,000 acres of heavily forested terrain. 12 days after the shooting, YouTuber couple and self-proclaimed bounty hunters, Fred and Sheila McCoy, found Couch's heavily decomposed remains deep in the woods. He had succumbed to a gunshot wound to the head. Fred and Sheila made the discovery by walking in the direction of some vultures they saw flying overhead, indicating the presence of deteriorating flesh below. The couple, who live-streamed their efforts on the YouTube channel Hatfield McCoy Museum Adventures, received rewards totaling $25,000. While Couch's exact motives for committing the shooting remain unclear, several of his neighbors have described encounters which point toward mental instability. In February, Couch was charged with terroristic threatening after a neighbor confronted him for throwing a rock at their dog. During the conversation, Couch allegedly pointed a loaded AR-style rifle at his neighbor and the man's young daughter. Following the confrontation, 3 of the victim's dogs reportedly turned up dead, including 2 canines who had been poisoned. The neighbor failed to appear in court, later telling CBS that he had not been notified of the upcoming hearing and the case was dropped due to his absence. Another community member, 61-year-old Donald Causey, told reporters that he got along fine with Couch until about a week before the shooting, when Couch threatened Causey with a rifle for walking too close to his property. Causey went inside and Couch proceeded to circle his property dozens of times with the gun on his shoulder. Due to his lack of past issues with Couch, Causey opted not to call law enforcement, a choice that he later said he regretted. In hindsight, he said it was obvious that Couch's personality had changed in ways that were indicative of a deteriorating mental state. An investigation into the circumstances leading up to the shooting appears to be ongoing. Number 8. Bobby Sing Sha. In August of 2024, 21-year-old Nepalese national Muna Pandey was found shot to death inside her Houston, Texas apartment. The college student's remains were discovered after an unknown male called the building's management and notified them of a dead body inside the residence. The mysterious caller hung up without providing any additional information. A neighbor told investigators that he had overheard loud thumping coming from Pandey's apartment 2 days before her body was found, and he had not seen or heard from her since. One of the young woman's friends said that Pandey had installed a security camera due to an ongoing issue with a stalker in the year leading up to her death, and footage from the device proved instrumental in helping police identify the suspected killer. In the video, Pandey could be seen standing outside her apartment with some shopping bags, while a man later identified as 51-year-old Bobby Sing Sha ordered her into the home at gunpoint. About an hour later, Shah was seen leaving the residence with one of the shopping bags. Pandey never left her apartment again and was found dead 2 days later. Police released still images of the suspect, and a local restaurant owner who recognized him as a regular customer came forward to help identify him. 2 days after Pandey's body was found, a woman called law enforcement and said that she had recognized Shah as a man she had connected with on a sugar daddy dating website back in 2012. The accused killer is currently being detained without bail on suspicion of capital murder and a gun charge. Number 7. Bryce Jonathan Schubert. 32-year-old Melissa Jubain was reported missing in September 2024 after she failed to show up for her morning shift at the Providence St. Vincent Medical Center in Portland, Oregon, where she worked as a nurse. At the request of her co-workers, police attempted to conduct a welfare check at Jubain's residence in Beaverton, but she was nowhere to be found. Just 2 weeks earlier, the woman had married her husband, Brian Lantero, after a decade of dating long distance. Jubain had just returned to Oregon when she vanished and was planning to relocate to Washington State to live with her husband, who last heard from her on the morning of her disappearance. 3 days after Jubain went missing, police found her murdered remains. While authorities have released few details about the crime, including where her body was found and her manner of death, news of the discovery was accompanied by a statement announcing the arrest of Jubain's neighbor, Bryce Jonathan Schubert, on suspicion of first-degree murder. Schubert lived in the same apartment complex as Jubain and worked as a nurse at another facility. He pleaded not guilty and remains held without bail as he awaits his next court date, which is scheduled for mid-October. In the meantime, the judge overseeing the court proceedings has ordered for the documents regarding Jubain's murder to be sealed due to the high-profile nature of the case. Number 6. Brian Crossman Jr. 46-year-old Brian Crossman Sr., 41-year-old Erica Paulasiak Crossman, and Erica's teenage son, Colin Taft, were murdered at their home in rural Paulette, Vermont in September 2024, just months after the couple's wedding. Local residents were shocked by the deaths of the well-liked family who lived on a farm that had been in Brian Sr.'s family for generations. At the time of his death, Crossman was serving a one-year term as the town of Paulette's liaison to buildings and development and liaison to the town highway department. He had a reputation for being a good friend and neighbor and a hard-working member of the community. Police responded to the residents during the early morning hours on a Sunday after receiving a 911 call from Brian Sr.'s son, 22-year-old Brian Crossman Jr., who reported he claimed that he had found his family dead after returning from a walk. Inside the residence, officers found the bodies of Brian Sr., Erica, and Taft, who had all been shot to death. The murder weapon and multiple shell casings were recovered at the scene. Investigators identified Brian Jr. as the prime suspect in the case and obtained a warrant for his arrest on suspicion of 3 counts of aggravated murder. He was picked up in neighboring New York State and detained in Glens Falls, pending his extradition to Vermont. According to law enforcement, the accused killer has a history of aggression, cognitive setbacks, and mental health issues. Brian Jr. reportedly gave conflicting stories about his knowledge of the events leading up to the triple murder, and a search of his devices revealed recent internet searches related to serial killers and cold case murders. His alleged motive for the crime remains unclear. Number 5. Jason Carlson, Sherelle Allen, and Luke Anaya. At around 10 a.m. on a September morning, deputies in Jefferson County, Colorado, responded to a call at a local emergency room where a 45-year-old man had sought treatment after being beaten, tortured, and held captive by his roommates for 14 hours. The victim, who is listed in court documents as John Doe, told law enforcement that he had lived at the residence for several weeks and was in a basement bedroom at around 2 in the morning when he overheard the culprits discussing their plans to attack him. In a frantic attempt to avoid being harmed, the man unsuccessfully tried to climb out his window. He then tried barricading himself inside the room by placing items in front of the door, but his assailants barged in and shot at him with rock salt using airsoft-type guns. According to police documents, 39-year-old Jimmy Ray Smith II stepped on the victim's neck, rendering him unconscious. The attackers proceeded to tie John Doe to a chair, then took turns striking his knees with a baseball bat. 49-year-old Jason Carlson is accused of pouring lighter fluid on the man's face and igniting the liquid, while 48-year-old Sherelle Allen and 41-year-old Luke Anaya were also implicated in the case. The victim finally reached a hospital after 2 people arrived at the residence and told the suspects to leave him alone. They drove John Doe to another residence where they realized he needed medical treatment and had someone drop him off at the entrance of a local hospital. Court documents note that his injuries aligned with his explanation of events, including facial burns, singed eyebrows, broken neck cartilage, swollen and discolored knees, and evidence that he had been bound. A SWAT team arrested Carlson, Allen, and Anaya, who remain behind bars at the Jefferson County Jail in lieu of cash bonds ranging from $150,000 to $300,000. The suspects are each facing multiple charges, including attempted first-degree murder, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and second-degree kidnapping. Number 4. Jesse Chapes. Early one morning in September, an apartment building in Portage, Indiana, became engulfed in flames. Firefighters arrived almost immediately from the fire station next door, and while most of the residents escaped, 87-year-old Maria Leal died from smoke inhalation inside the ground floor apartment she shared with her daughter. And it's no coincidence that the fire was started in the very same apartment, according to investigators, who quickly narrowed their sights on Leal's daughter's boyfriend as the prime suspect in the deadly arson. 51-year-old Jesse Chapes is now facing charges of arson, murder in perpetration of arson, and intimidation. He stands accused of setting the building ablaze after arguing with Leal's daughter at a bar hours earlier. According to court documents, Chapes' girlfriend had previously told a friend that she was scared of Chapes, who she described as jealous and controlling. After the couple got into a disagreement prior to the fire, Chapes left the bar they were at in his girlfriend's car, while she got a ride from someone to another bar. Shortly after 11 p.m., Chapes began calling his girlfriend and threatening to burn down her residence. When the woman's friend who answered the phone told Chapes that he wasn't really going to do that, he reportedly replied, "Watch me." At around midnight, the woman and her friend learned that Chapes had apparently made good on his promise. Inside the apartment, investigators found evidence that the fire had been started using an accelerant, including a nearly empty bottle of lighter fluid on the porch that had been full prior to the arson. Police believe Chapes accessed the apartment through his girlfriend's bedroom window, which she often left unlocked, so Chapes could come and go without disturbing her mother. Officers confronted Chapes after they saw him driving near the crime scene. He denied being responsible for the blaze, but he will now be tasked with proving his proclaimed innocence in the court of law. Number 3. Jordan Jared Law. 54-year-old Ray Allison Beerwanger was last seen in March of 2019 at the Bonner County, Idaho residence of her ex-boyfriend, 46-year-old Jordan Jared Law. Shortly after she vanished, Law mentioned that she had recently spoke about wanting to leave the area. He also told police that Beerwanger had purchased a car from him 3 days prior to her disappearance and that he had found the vehicle abandoned at an intersection 2 days later. Despite any signs that Beerwanger might have wanted to abandon her life in Idaho, investigators suspected foul play. And although her body has never been found, authorities believe she was murdered and are now attempting to hold Law responsible for her death. Law has been a person of interest since the early stages of the investigation into Beerwanger's disappearance. In 2020, roughly a year after Beerwanger went missing, he entered an Alford plea to a charge for unlawfully possessing his ex's debit card. He received a suspended sentence and a year probation, along with 100 hours of community service. In September of 2024, a grand jury indicted Law on charges of second-degree murder, offering false or forged instruments for the record, and destruction of evidence. He is also accused of assaulting another victim who was discovered during the investigation into Beerwanger's disappearance and does not appear to be in custody amid the ongoing cases. Today's topic was requested by Frosted900 and Peter Montoya 1796. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Jula Freeman. In a disturbing act of unprovoked violence that was captured on video in September of 2024, an elderly New York City resident was sucker punched by a complete stranger on Manhattan's Upper West Side. 81-year-old Jula Freeman was walking her son's dog near her apartment building at around 7 p.m. when she was knocked unconscious by her attacker, who could be seen walking past the senior citizen, then reaching back and striking her on the side of the face. After being knocked flat on the ground, the octogenarian received treatment for a concussion and facial injuries at a nearby hospital. Speaking with the New York Post, Freeman said she had no recollection of the attack. The first thing she remembered afterward was sitting in her sister's apartment, which is located in the same building. She told the Post that she didn't feel targeted and didn't take the incident personally, but that she hoped the perpetrator would get help for whatever issues they have which triggered them to commit the attack. The NYPD released footage of the incident, but the suspect remains at large. These 2024 cases were truly terrifying, but what happens when an ordinary true crime fan takes their obsession way too far. Right after number 1, we've got our previous release of When True Crime Fans Go Wrong, so stick around. Number 1. Walter King Birkham. On a Wednesday evening in September of 2024, police in Des Moines, Iowa, responded to a call about a medical event at a local residence. Emergency responders arrived to find 52-year-old Suzette Ray Gumbs in cardiac arrest and losing a large amount of blood from a laceration to her leg. She was rushed to the emergency room where she succumbed to her injuries despite the life-saving efforts of paramedics and doctors. 58-year-old Walter King Birkham was detained at the scene and has since been charged in connection with Gumbs' death. According to prosecutors, Birkham stabbed the victim during a domestic dispute and failed to call for emergency help. He remains behind bars at the Polk County Jail on a second-degree murder charge, and the investigation into the incident is ongoing. Officers from the Hampshire Constabulary in southeast England responded to a home in Havant to investigate a possible homicide on the morning of July the 17th of 2022. They were met at the front door by 27-year-old Shay Groves, who was wearing a pink dressing gown and smoking a cigarette. In body cam footage later released to the public, Groves apologized for her barking dogs before being informed that she was under arrest on suspicion of murder. The woman's friend, Vicky Baitup, had reportedly called the police following an alarming video chat that took place earlier that morning. Baitup testified that Groves had called her and was giggling away as she pointed the camera at the lifeless body of her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Frankie Fitzgerald, aged 25. She told her friend, "I've done him," at which point Baitup phoned the police. Responding law enforcement immediately noted the pungent smell of bleach in the bedroom. As it turned out, the woman had viciously stabbed Fitzgerald, a father of two, 17 times in the chest as he slept. The eruption of violence reportedly stemmed from the fact that Groves was jealous of her boyfriend's correspondence with another girl, whom she believed to be 13 years old. However, as it would later emerge, the individual Fitzgerald had communicated with was actually 17 years old, and he'd already blocked her number prior to the deadly attack. While searching the home, investigators found several framed pictures of real-life serial killers on Groves' wall, including Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Myra Hindley. They also came upon a collection of books about violent criminals, most notably the notorious British prisoner Charles Bronson. Groves was described as being obsessed with horror films and true crime documentaries, and even had her own history of violence. Baitup claimed that she'd once attacked a former roommate with nail clippers during an argument. Groves denied murder, claiming she'd acted in self-defense. But in February of 2023, she was found guilty of the crime and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years. Number 5. Brian Kohberger. 4 students from the University of Idaho were murdered in their off-campus apartment during the early morning hours of November the 13th of 2022. The victims were identified as Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, and Zana Knodel, who lived at the house, as well as the latter's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin. 2 other residents of the rental property, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, were also home at the time but weren't harmed themselves. It was initially believed that Mortensen and Funk had been asleep when the perpetrator struck. However, it was later revealed that one of the surviving residents had seen a figure clad in black clothing and a mask who walked past her as he left the crime scene. She also testified to hearing someone crying on the night of the killings. A wide-reaching police investigation ensued involving nearly 130 members of law enforcement from the Moscow Police Department, the Idaho State Police, and the Latah County Sheriff's Office. Fortunately, a surveillance camera in the area had captured an image of an Hyundai Elantra leaving the scene around the time of the murders. The same vehicle was also observed driving past the victim's apartment 3 separate times in the hours following the home invasion. Investigators learned that the Elantra in question was owned by a man named Brian Kohberger. In December, Kohberger took the car on a road trip to Pennsylvania with his father for the holidays. He was pulled over twice within a 5-mile radius in Indiana, once for speeding and once for tailgating, but the police weren't yet aware of his involvement in the University of Idaho slayings, so he was permitted to leave. Cell phone data confirmed that Kohberger had been at the victim's house at the time they were killed. The suspect was further linked to the murders by way of a leather knife sheath left at the crime scene, which contained traces of his DNA. The 28-year-old was finally arrested in Pennsylvania on December the 30th, then returned to Idaho a few days later to face the charges against him. Upon his identification to the public, it emerged that Cobber held a special interest in criminology, which might have foreshadowed his sudden outbreak of violence. Earlier that year, he'd reportedly earned a master's degree in criminal justice from DeSales University in Pennsylvania. At the time of the murders, Cobber was a doctoral student in criminology at Washington State University, having completed his first semester only 9 days prior to his arrest. It was reported that he'd been confronted by faculty members about his increasingly concerning behavior and conduct less than 2 weeks before he committed the quadruple homicide. A preliminary probable cause hearing in connection with the case was scheduled for June of 2023. Number 4. Gemma Victoria Lilly. At a young age, Gemma Victoria Lilly, originally from the town of Stamford in Lincolnshire, England, developed a deep fascination with serial killers. Diagnosed with dyslexia and autism at the age of 6, the girl's parents separated following domestic abuse by her mother, after which she and her sibling lived with their father. Around this time, Lilly started watching films about serial killers, which inspired her to dress up as them and collect butcher knives for fun. In her teen years, she penned a novel about a serial killer named SOS, in reference to David Berkowitz, better known as the son of Sam. The book was later published online under the pen name Sin Demon. In 2012, having recently moved to Australia, Lilly married a gay man in order to obtain permanent residency. Her husband died 2 years later, after which she grew particularly close to one of his old friends, Trudy Lennon. The latter frequently engaged in erotic practices as a so-called submissive. In May of 2016, she and Lilly forged a dominant submissive relationship and moved in together in Western Australia. The following month, the pair found themselves under police scrutiny in connection with the murder of Aaron Payich, an 18-year-old with autism spectrum disorder. CCTV had captured Lilly and Lennon driving out of the parking lot at Rockingham Centre with Payich inside their vehicle. A camera outside the women's home also recorded them entering the residence with the young man in tow. On the night of June the 20th, about a week after Payich had last been seen, officers went to the home to look for him. They eventually found his body buried in a 12-inch deep grave in the backyard. An autopsy concluded that he'd been stabbed in the neck and chest, which had severed a jugular vein and punctured both his liver and lungs. There were also marks on his neck consistent with strangulation, as well as defensive wounds on his hands. Lilly and Lennon pleaded not guilty to murder charges at Stirling Gardens Magistrates Court. In October of the following year, their trial began at the Supreme Court of Western Australia. The criminal proceedings revealed that Lilly had sought someone to kill in order to take murder off her bucket list by the age of 25. One of her co-workers reportedly told police that she had admitted to killing Payich just days after his disappearance. Lilly and Lennon were confronted with online conversations in which they expressed readiness to commit murder, as well as lists of torture methods and items used for torture found in their house, but claimed that it was all part of the writing process for the books they were authoring. Nevertheless, in November of 2017, they were both found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 28 years. Number 3. Casey Scott. A man from Lincolnshire, England, hired an escort for $187 an hour on the night of July the 20th of 2016. Casey Scott subsequently brought the woman, identified as 28-year-old Lenuta Heidemak, back to his flat in Skegness. During the course of their session, however, Scott pulled out a knife and brutally stabbed Heidemak, whom he also strangled before she finally succumbed to his attack. The 29-year-old man then took a picture of the victim's degraded body as a morbid trophy, having crudely scrawled the name Jack across her abdomen in reference to the notorious British serial killer Jack the Ripper, whom he revered. Scott left Heidemak's body in his apartment and fled, remaining on the run for 3 days before being tracked down by police. Heidemak, a mother of 2, lived with her partner, Octavian Celestine, in Boston, about 20 miles from Scott's place. On the night of the incident, Celestine had contacted the authorities after not hearing from Heidemak for some time. Officers searched Scott's residence, where they found a used condom, a blood-stained knife, and Heidemak's lifeless body. She was naked, lying on her back and partially covered by a duvet. Investigators determined that Scott had researched and studied Jack the Ripper extensively prior to committing the murder. The man ultimately admitted to the crime, and during a sentencing hearing at Lincoln Crown Court, was jailed for life with a minimum term of 19 years. Number 2. Cody Ackland. On the evening of November the 20th of 2021, 24-year-old Cody Ackland from the English port city of Plymouth accosted a teenage girl at a bus stop, hitting her over the head with a claw hammer. The man proceeded to kidnap 18-year-old Bobby Ann McLeod, whom he subjected to a prolonged assault in the woods, causing catastrophic injuries to her head and face. After she was dead, Ackland drove to Bothersand Beach, roughly 30 miles away, where he dumped her body. In the hours that followed, he went to a pub lock-in with friends and held a rehearsal with his rock band, Rakuda. Ackland went about his normal routine for a few days after the killing. Then, on the 23rd of November, he left his valet job at around midday and walked to the Charles Cross police station to confess to the murder. Investigators subsequently found over 3,000 graphic images on Ackland's phone, which depicted disturbing scenes of post-mortem examinations, dismembered bodies, and even murders. The young man reportedly held an unhealthy obsession with serial killers that went beyond morbid fascination and manifested in a desire to imitate the sadistic murderers he idolized. In court, prosecutors tried to portray the similarities between Ackland's method of slaying McLeod and the modus operandi employed by Ted Bundy during his murder spree in the 70s. Both Ackland and Bundy approached their victims, who were strangers to them in public places, before taking them to a secluded spot to kill them. In prison, Ackland was examined by psychiatrists, who found no mental illness that would allow him to plead diminished responsibility. He remained largely impassive while being tried in Plymouth Crown Court the following May. Judge Robert Linford labeled him a highly dangerous person who may never see freedom again. In the end, Ackland was given a life sentence and wouldn't be eligible for early release until he spent at least 31 years behind bars. Number 1. Hampshire schoolgirl. An English schoolgirl arranged to meet her best friend at a quiet corner of their Hampshire school grounds on April the 25th of 2016. She'd promised her friend a gift, but when they met up at the corner, she pulled out a kitchen knife and started stabbing the other girl. The victim managed to escape with only a minor injury to her chest. She'd been asked to close her eyes while receiving the present, but opened them just in time to see the girl lunging towards her with a knife. The friend jumped back instantly, preventing the blade from penetrating deep into her skin. Upon being taken into police custody, the unidentified girl admitted wanting to hurt her friend, but denied seeking to kill her. In spite of her claims, investigators learned that she'd previously researched fatal stab wounds to the heart on the internet. She was also fixated on serial killers, namely Ted Bundy, about whom she'd once made a school project. The girl was also accused of plotting to kill her mother and brother, and allegedly wrote a journal entry that included plans for a school shooting. The crime-obsessed girl was said to have been inspired by the Columbine shooting and other mass killings. She was ultimately found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 10 years in detention. Thanks for watching. If you could time travel, would you rather travel to the year 2400 BC or to the year 2400? And why? Let us know in the comments section below.